So welcome to Talking Insights, the podcast from Esomar that gazes into the crystal ball of the future to find out where the world is going next. I'm your host, Shrika Govindaraju, and throughout this series, I'm speaking to researchers and thought leaders from around the world to explore the past, present, and future of technology, society, business, and beyond. There's no time like the present to talk about the future, so let's dive in. Video games are big business. The games industry is projected to generate over $150 billion in revenue this year, catering to over 2.7 billion gamers. Little wonder that the games industry surpassed the movie industry in terms of scale a few years ago. As COVID takes its toll on theaters and with millions of us locked down, it seems video games once again are going to take the crown as the preeminent source of entertainment for many. But while games are once considered the preserve of children or the tech-obsessed, it is clear that this massive growth hasn't been driven by geeks alone. Gamers today span every possible age group and demographic. Today, we're looking at a particular sector of the gaming audience who has so far gone relatively unnoticed, but thanks to new research conducted by one of the biggest names in the industry, Activision Blizzard, we can start to understand more about how games have truly gone global. I'm very excited today to be speaking with Jan Bojko, head of market research at Activision Blizzard Media, who oversees syndicated reporting, thought leadership, and sales enablement research content for advertising and sponsorship endeavors. Activision Blizzard Media is the media and advertising arm of the renowned video game publisher Activision Blizzard, the studio behind titles such as Call of Duty, Overwatch, Crash Bandicoot, World of Warcraft, Tony Hawk, and many more. Jan, thank you so much for taking the time to join us.
Yeah, absolutely, Shrika. My absolute pleasure to be working with Esomar finally. So I started my career in Australia and obviously looking to international markets to garner new industry reporting. And a lot of that came from your organization. So really great to be contributing back to a company that's helped me out over the years.
Fantastic. I'm glad we brought things full circle. Well, funny enough, so the research that inspired us to put this podcast together was on the gamer mom phenomenon, the gamer mom audience. And I saw the article that was published on Research World, and I thought this is something that we do want to take a look at. So can you just give us, first of all, a bit of a background into why this was a particular sector of the gaming market that you wanted to research? And yeah, well, what drove you to kind of look closer at the gamer mom segment?
Yeah, certainly. I'd have to start with a bit of an introduction as to the team that I work for. So Activision Blizzard, I'm sure many are familiar with, yourself in particular, but Activision Blizzard Media is a subunit of the business that was set up a few years ago, really looking at monetizing the gaming audiences in new ways, and primarily through advertising, sponsorship, and game and brand integrations. The gaming industry has been reliant on $60 AAA titles and console releases for a long time. With the rise of mobile gaming in particular, we have really been changing that monetization model. And we are a team of industry experts, from researchers to marketers to sellers to product managers, really trying to figure out exactly how to do this in the right way within video gaming. So we started off our endeavors when Activision Blizzard acquired King, the makers of Candy Crush, in 2016 for a sizable sum. I think it was close to $6 billion, which is quite impressive, considering Star Wars, I think, was acquired for about $4 billion by Disney.
It does put in perspective how big the games market is now compared to the movie industry. It's crazy how the scale has changed completely.
Yeah, for sure. I heard that in your intro. The gaming industry attracts more revenue than both the music and film industries combined. So it is huge. But the acquisition of King really opened up those opportunities for monetizing gaming via ads. Because it is a free-to-play model, we need to be able to monetize our users outside of in-app purchases, because we know that only a small percentage of our audience actually pays for that content. So we need to think of other ways to make the most of this product. So the Candy Crush audience, contrary to what people think of typically when they think of a video gamer, the Candy Crush audience actually skews female, and it skews a little bit more middle-aged and even into older demographics. And by that, we actually see a lot of mums actually attracted to the franchise, and the franchise is sitting underneath King. So not only Candy Crush, but also Bubble Witch Saga and Farm Heroes Saga and the like. So knowing that we have these strong indexes with this demographic, we also know that this demographic is very lucrative to marketers and advertisers. However, when we start speaking to marketers and advertisers and tell them that we have one of the biggest mobile gaming franchises in the world, they're like, oh, we don't want to reach young teenage boys. That's just not our audience.
Yeah.
So we obviously had a lot of education to do, which is really spearheaded by the research function, of which I think I was the second researcher to join the team shortly after by our VP. And we realized that we really need to start educating the industry about gaming before we can actually start selling Activision Blizzard and its properties as well. And a big part of that is audience education, obviously being, in this case, gamer mums.
And doing the research, I was looking through the white paper that you guys put out, and it makes some really interesting reading. And what for you personally was some of the more interesting or some of the more kind of unexpected findings that you came across doing this study?
Yeah, I mean, we have conducted our own research for quite some time on this audience and got to know it quite well. But there were definitely still some things that came through that did surprise us. So definitely for all your listeners, look online to Gamer Mums. We have a beautiful digital website. If you type in Activision Blizzard Media, follow the links from there. It'll direct you to it. But we conducted online quantitative research in 4 markets: the US, UK, France, and Germany. They're our primary ad markets that we deal with. So we want to make sure that we can cover those markets in a lot of detail. We spoke to over 7,000 mums, both gamer and non-gamer. So a very robust sample that we can slice and dice the data any which way we want. But some of the highlights that we found from that is that we actually found within those 4 markets, gamer mums actually account for the majority of mums. So it varied a little bit within the 4 markets, but we found, between 65 to 70% of the mum population in these markets actually engage with video games, whether it's mobile gaming or PC and console gaming, or whether it's watching esports. The majority of this cohort, now this very valuable demographic, actually engages with gaming.
And what do you think? So we're seeing more, mums as a kind of the umbrella term. Getting into gaming in the different forms that you mentioned then, so whether it's mobile or kind of esports, console games as well. Do you have an idea of some of the drivers behind this? What do you think is kind of bringing this newer audience or this slightly older audience into the gaming market, which, as you mentioned before, people previously thought was just a preserve of teenage boys?
Yeah, there is a ton of different motivational research that we include in this research, and also subsequent research that we've just released as well, which looks at the broader gaming market. But we'll keep this on gamer mums. We found that much like other gaming demographics, there are a multitude of reasons why gamer mums actually tap into video gaming content. A lot of mums might need a little bit of me time, particularly in times like these when you might be stuck inside the house with your kids running around and causing all kinds of trouble. You maybe want 10 minutes just to get away and relax and unwind. And we're finding that mobile gaming is a really easy way to do that. You've literally got your phone with you the entire time. You can just walk into another room, maybe shut the door for 5 minutes and just take a moment to unwind and relax. That relaxation element is really important to this demographic cohort, as it is for other demographics, as we've been seeing more recently. But particularly for mums, there's a ton that's riding on their minds, and a lot of responsibility, and a lot that they do for themselves and also for the home, that they actually need that me time. And gaming is one of those mechanisms that they use to indulge that motivation. But outside of that, I think one of the big things that came through for this audience in particular was that idea of connection, being able to connect either with your kids or perhaps with your friends, particularly now if you can't see each other face to face. There's an easy way to interact with them. That's through a game like Candy Crush. We have a mechanism that you can send your friends or colleagues a life if you run out of life when you're trying to crush through some rounds. And it's an easy way to start a conversation. We actually did some qualitative research as part of this, and we spoke to, I think, 7 mothers in the UK, some of which were empty nesters, some of which were new mums, some of which had preteen or teenage age kids. And there's this one mum that we spoke to that she would actually play Candy Crush and see that her mother-in-law would be online. She would send her a life, and then from there they would actually divert into a WhatsApp conversation. So that was kind of like the catalyst of actually connecting and having a conversation with friends and loved ones. So that idea of connection is really important for this audience as well.
And I noticed that in the research as well. One of the things that you do mention is the idea that this connectivity and this use of technology also changes their perception of technology overall. So it's not just a question of, gaming is also for my kind of age group or my kind of, demographic. It's also technology and other people who play games. So whereas, my mom, when I was younger, I'd get the threat of, if you don't stop playing the next 5 minutes, I'm going to hit the power button. Is that now changing as more moms kind of get into the gaming space?
Yeah, we definitely asked questions that were not particularly relevant to the gaming industry, but just about their attitudes and behaviors at large. And we found that the gamer mum cohort, as opposed to non-gamer mum cohort, were more in tune with the latest technology. Where they were more willing to try out new products and services. For advertisers, they're more willing to try brands that they haven't tried before as well. So this audience does seem a little bit more forward-thinking and a bit more open to new experiences, which I think is great to develop the industry overall, but also as a great opportunity for marketers and advertisers to tap in. I'm going to read a quick quote from a mum of two from Florida from our research. She's in her late 30s. I won't name her here, but she summed up this idea of different kinds of motivations that gaming fulfills really well and much more eloquently than I could. She's done it in 2 sentences as well, which I think is incredible. But this mother of two from Florida says that gaming helps me relax and unwind, helps me bond with and create fun memories with others, helps me feel a sense of accomplishment, entertains me and others, is fun, is a challenge, and is mentally invigorating. It also helps teach my children many important skills like problem solving, teamwork, perseverance, gives a sense of accomplishment, enhances concentration, and gives opportunities for creativity, etc. I mean, I think she's listed about 12 or 13 different kinds of motivations, not only for herself, but also for her kids as well, that gaming fulfills. So you can see that they understand the opportunities that exist within this medium, not only for entertainment purposes, but also for self-expression and personal development. And we're starting to see, as this gamer mum audience becomes more leaned into this environment and they're shaking away those social stigmas of playing a video game, they're really getting a lot more out of it.
And that's the kind of quote that I think would have served me very well about 15 years ago to show my parents, saying, like, look at this, I'm not just wasting my time. This is
I have a very similar experience with my parents, except I can turn to them now and say, hey, this is paying my wage right now. So
I have the empirical facts to back up my hobby. And speaking of the types of games I mentioned, previously before, and I think there is, when you do speak about mums and gamers, parents and gamers in general, there is that stereotype that it's mobile games, right? Like, as you mentioned, kind of Candy Crush, and that's the kind of gaming that they're engaging with. But I think one of the other things the research shows is that that's not always the case. It does go beyond mobile gaming. So do you think that stereotype is somewhat unfounded or, a bit unfair, or is it still reflected in the data that you pull together?
Look, there is a lot of truth to it. I mean, 90% of the gamer mum audiences that we spoke to do play on mobile, at least weekly. 75% are playing daily. But we do see there is a larger group or a growing group that is engaging with gaming on other platforms, whether that's PC on console. I believe we had 35% engaging on a weekly basis or a daily basis on console, and then 29% on PC. They are starting to dabble into these different kinds of platforms as well. As their kids or their partner has these devices in their home, there might be opportunities for co-op play, and then they might be intrigued to play by themselves as well. There's another, I don't have the quote in front of me, but we got some great footage from another US mum in New York who actually entered in a local Fortnite tournament that was run by her kids' friends. She ended up winning the tournament, which was absolutely incredible.
That's fantastic.
What's not as fantastic is actually her kids got all of the credit. So the friends were like, "Oh, you must have been teaching your mums all the tricks and how to win a battle royale." And she's like, "No, I did this all myself. What are you doing? Give me that credit."
Oh, so even then, it's the gaming comes back to the kids, which I think what I really liked about this study and the work you find out is that it really shakes up that perception, which I think has been hanging over games for too long. As you mentioned in the back introduction, there's 2.7 billion gamers on the planet. Those can't all be kids, right? There's grown-ups there. There's a lot of grown-ups who are involved in that market.
Yeah, if you're talking about 1/3 of the global population, and closer to Europe, in the UK, I think 37 million Brits play video games, which is over half of the British population. Very similar trends in France and Germany and other European countries. If you're reaching over half of the population, it can't just be men under 18. There's not that we should be looking at Reddit as the cultural yardstick, but there's a great meme that says, it shows a stat that says there are more gamers that are female over 30 than there are gamers that are male under 18. And they show that meme of LA Noire where it says I doubt that. I really doubt that. But it's true. If you're looking at, from multiple research companies, you're seeing the reach of this industry now. It's actually absolutely incredible. And it means that we have to start thinking about, hey, these stereotypes that we've had in our minds for decades, they may have been true in the 80s and 90s, but they're definitely not true today, primarily due in the last 10 years to the rise of mobile gaming, making gaming now more accessible than ever. And when we're seeing other developments in the industry that I'm sure we'll touch on later, like streaming products where you literally can be playing on a potato from 20 years ago. You can be playing the latest AAA games as long as you have a good internet connection. The barriers to entry are very low. So anyone can be trying out this medium and experiencing all the great creative products that there is to offer.
And speaking, as you mentioned then, of how it was perceived back in the 80s and 90s, I mean, there was, in the 90s, I was about 5 or 6 years old, and I was playing on my friend's PlayStation 1 in our flat. We were playing Crash Bandicoot, which of course is under the Activision umbrella. And do you think as that generation kind of we reach adulthood, or you kind of reach that point in life where you might be becoming parents, might be settling down, you carry that hobby forwards with you? So do you think, are we going to see proportionally this kind of segment of the gaming market continue to grow as people who grew up with it, you reach that point in life, you kind of reach adulthood and then maturity as well?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's got part ways in explaining the rise of the gamer mum audience. But to your point, like gaming in the 80s and 90s, I mean, I grew up in the 90s as well. Video gaming is what you did on the weekends. When you met a new kid in the neighborhood, you're like, oh, do you have a Sega or a Super Nintendo? Can we come around and play? These kids back then have now grown up, and a lot of them are developers. They're researchers like myself. They're marketers that are actually helping create this content. And you're starting to see the kind of content that gaming is producing changing, is becoming more inclusive. There's a very long way to go, absolutely. But we are starting to see those incremental changes, which is making gaming, I think, more open and more accessible to different audiences as well. With the rise of new platforms like mobile or even VR or augmented reality or other new technological developments, we are starting to see games like Crash Bandicoot or Call of Duty or Diablo, they're being reimagined for different experiences. So they're being brought to mobile platforms. The old ones are being remastered and having great functionalities that we would never even have thought possible in the 90s. No longer do we have to write down secret codes to actually save our progress. We can just have auto saves, which makes things a hell of a lot easier, particularly for those of us who don't have as much time as we once did. But we are starting to see those reimagined experiences for people like yourself and myself who grew up with these games, but now want to introduce new audiences to these great pieces of content.
I want to add a minor caveat, which is when I was playing Crash Remastered, the high road still just caused me to tear my hair. I had to, that was just as challenging as it was about 15, 20 years ago.
We have such fun memories of Crash Bandicoot and even games like Donkey Kong, but I think we very quickly forget how freaking difficult those games were. It is such a challenge.
Tough learning curve, yeah.
Absolutely, but it's a lot of fun.
Now, I want to. So the research, as you mentioned before, it's fascinating. It's on your website. We'll include a link to it in the episode description as well to make sure that everyone gets a chance to read it. It's a wonderfully laid out website as well. It's really nice to just scroll through. Moving from the research to the wider gaming industry as a whole, and before we started recording, you mentioned as well how you've been in kind of work from home basis since about March, as many of us have. How have you been seeing the games and the video game industry dealing with the fallout of COVID, of the pandemic? How has it been impacting, whether it's your work on the marketing and the research side, or perhaps the development side as well?
Yeah, I mean, like I mentioned before, that humans have that inherent need to have connectivity, and we've been missing out on a lot of that ever since March. So people are looking at new ways of interacting, and gaming is a very safe space in order to interact with your friends and colleagues and loved ones in a safe environment, but one that's just inherently fun and entertaining. So we've seen a lot of gaming or traditional gaming audiences really lean into gaming even more so than before, but we're also seeing new audiences come into the picture. I mean, when me and my wife were still in Brooklyn, we were Skyping back to Australia to my wife's parents, and we actually managed to get them to log on to Jackbox and play, which is, for any of your listeners that don't know, it's kind of like arcade style Pictionary style games that you play online, very easy to jump into. We managed to get, her parents who are a little bit older, really just jump in with no problem and have a really good time and have that shared experience. So we are seeing, I guess, the benefits of the gaming industry come to light and how easy it is to interact with and engage with others. I think people are really finding a lot of solace and a lot of comfort in that as well. So I mean, that's from a consumer perspective, but from a business side, as you mentioned, we're all working from home. It has been, as with others, it takes some getting used to, but we are very fortunate to be in that position to be working from home. Our partners on the marketing side, they've had to reimagine how they message consumers. They've been reallocating their media budgets. They've been thinking about the creative. So we've been trying our best to educate consumers, particularly as researchers, how consumption has changed in order to inform that messaging, to make sure that they're actually hitting the right note and not being too heavy-handed with a particular message, and making sure that whatever they're trying to message consumers actually gets through.
You see, you end up with another one of those emails that says, "We know it's a difficult time," as you've been getting from most of the marketing lists.
That line is done. Okay, it's very tired. We've got to start switching up our copy and our creative. Absolutely. You mentioned the film industry before. I think there's a wider implication here for gaming versus other entertainment medium, in that, games development is going to be still very difficult to do from home, but it's much easier to do, I think, than other industries, particularly when we're thinking about AAA titles and we're thinking about voice actors potentially. That can be done from home. We think about motion capture. That can be in a relatively, low personnel environment, 4 to 5 people in the room, which makes things much easier from a production standpoint, as opposed to, say, broadcast television or even feature film production, where you need a lot of people on set at once. We're seeing a lot of those productions being shut down. So we might find ourselves in a position in 6, 12, 18 months' time where that content might be starting to dry up a little bit, particularly as we've been binging and going through Netflix catalogs and Amazon Prime catalogs and the like. We will definitely see, I think, a slowdown in the gaming industry, but I would say less so than what we're seeing in other entertainment media.
And for those who might not be in the know who are listening, AAA games, which Jan referred to then, are kind of your top of the line, your tentpole, big budget. The studio goes all out with the quality and the voice acting. And
think of the Marvel movie franchise. Those franchises that come out every single year. You're expecting the best. Everyone goes into is rushing to see or consume that content. That's essentially what AAA titles are.
But I mean, staying on that kind of comparison, the budgets are almost comparable now, right? I mean, you're talking, AAA game, you see some news where games like Red Dead Redemption or Last of Us that came out, the production and marketing budgets are north of $150 million, which is what you'd expect from a big blockbuster. I mean, how do you see the games industry continuing to push money into those kind of once a year big event games? Or are we going to see more of a shift to, like people expect with the movie industry, perhaps a few smaller budget, more independent titles per year to strike that economic balance?
Yeah, I mean, I am definitely not a market analyst in this regard, but we do know that the games industry attracts a ton of revenue. I think the Newzoo, which is a research company that covers the gaming space in quite a lot of detail, their estimates for 2020 revenues from the gaming industry were about $159 billion, which is more than double with film and music, that, as I mentioned before. They've just recently revised their estimates as of last week so the gaming industry will attract, I think, 174 to 175 billion. So that they've actually increased those estimates based off earnings calls that we've seen over the last couple of quarters, due to that changing consumer consumption pattern that we've seen ever since COVID has hit. So I definitely think we will see a world where those AAA titles will exist. What will be really interesting with the rise of streaming services and the like is how that shifts potentially. I think going back to a topic we were talking about earlier, yourself and myself growing up in the 80s and 90s with video gaming content, a lot of those developers are now creating their own games. We're seeing a great rise in independent studios pushing out content. I don't think they're going to be as hampered with current work from home conditions, because they are working in small teams anyway. I mean, I'm playing Hades right now from Supergiant Games. It's a relatively small studio. I think it's a dozen or maybe a couple of dozen employees, they've released some absolute blockbuster titles, and they seem to be doing it every couple of years without missing a beat. So I'm so excited to see the rise of those independent studios come through, but I'm equally excited to see titles like Red Dead Redemption, like Crash Bandicoot, like Cyberpunk, which unfortunately just got delayed. But either way, it is going to be coming out at some point in time, and it's going to be an absolute blockbuster. So I think rather than replacing traditional models, we are just going to see an expansion of different kinds of gaming content as the years progress.
It's really fascinating. You're speaking to someone else who obviously is a gamer or a hobbyist gamer as we are nowadays. You kind of fit it around your work. It's not like back in the days when you'd be on there all day. And same for myself. I've been flitting between, on the one hand, The Witcher, which is this huge AAA open world expansive RPG, and then Rocket League, sometimes for just a quick 5-minute game, and you're playing online with a few random people, and then you can just drop in, drop out. As you mentioned, have that accessibility, which I think, as you mentioned, is one of the key ways that games have changed over the years. Is you've gone from that you have to have the little box under your TV to do anything, to now it's anytime, it's anywhere, it's more open, it's more flexible, and as a result, we're seeing those amazing statistics that you mentioned then, over 170 billion.
I'm seeing my personal consumption definitely change. Like, you used to have marathon 10, 12-hour sessions on the weekend playing a game like Diablo 2, or even a bit more recently, The Witcher 3, which is thousands of hours worth of content. I'm finding I'm supplementing that gaming time as I'm going to become a father in a couple of months' time. I'm going to have to find more snackable ways of getting that gaming fix. So I'm leading right into games like Hearthstone, which is in the World of Warcraft universe, but games last 5 to 10 minutes at a time. I can sneak in a round or two here and there without really taking away from any kind of key responsibility that I should be spending my time on.
And that brings us quite neatly onto what is, the sort of future forward look, as you mentioned. So even people like ourselves have been playing games for 20 plus years, your kind of habits are changing. And there's a lot that's coming in gaming that I think is going to change that, even more. So we look at just the coming few months, or within a few weeks, we've got the next generation of consoles, the PlayStation 5 and the Xbox Series X, 1X, I always get them mixed up, Series X. The name is confusing. We got, the rise of things like games as a service. We have microtransactions which have come into games and generated a bit of controversy. How do you see some of these things developing as we move forward? So we can take them one by one, perhaps. So if we start with consoles, for example, the new generation of consoles, both can be priced at around 500 euros, we'll say, give or take. How big do you see the launch of those being this year, especially considering, on the one hand, the kind of economic issues around COVID, but also the fact that there's not very much else in the way of entertainment at the moment?
Yeah, I find console launches are really exciting, but a really fascinating time, I think, from a consumer standpoint. So we're finding both the PlayStation and the Xbox consoles are selling out for pre-orders. So even if you wanted to get your hands on them, you literally can't spend your money to get them, which I think, that might be a function of production issues given COVID as well, but there might be some tactics at play there too. But regardless, I think that'll allow those gamers at the forefront buying and upgrading new hardware just really deepen their experiences, and really being able to spread that message out about what's really great about this industry and what's changing, and what are those incremental things that we're seeing as these new titles and new platforms are coming out every year. I think at this point it's going to be very hard to find a household that doesn't have a console in the household, even if it's going back a couple of generations, PlayStation 4 or PlayStation 3. There's a lot of functionality here that these developers and manufacturers are producing to allow people that might have a console that's 5, 6, 7 years old to play someone that's going to be waiting in line at midnight and getting the latest console release, and being able to play with your friends regardless of what your hardware specs are, or whatever else it might be. So I think console releases are exciting. They might change in the future, obviously, as games as a service come into play. We've seen the head of Microsoft and Xbox, Phil Spencer, have a lot to say about that. Whether there will be a traditional console in the future, who knows? But it's definitely being thought about in those houses, and we'll see the impact or the result of that, I think, in the next probably in the next couple of console releases.
And speaking of games as service, then, so as you mentioned, Xbox are kind of, they're pushing their service. I think PlayStation Now is kind of their streaming service. And we have, one of the biggest tech companies in the world, Google, trying to, muscle in on the action with Stadia as well, trying to get a slice of this huge industry. And what are your kind of thoughts on
Facebook just quietly releasing a games portal over the last couple of days as well?
Yeah, on top of acquiring Oculus, I think, some time ago too. So that we're already in the VR space. And how do you see this games as a service market developing as you go forward? Now that all of the big players seem to have some vested interest in there, and do you think? And also, speaking of traditional gamers or the gamer mom audience as well, as you mentioned, then are we going to adopt that more and more? And how do you see that developing?
I mean, it seems to be working for the TV industry in some respects, but in other respects, it's not working. So we see Quibi, for example, flopped within 6 months. So we might see that happen with games as a service. There's a ton of value to be had from consumers. I don't think there's a better time for consumers of gaming content to be really experiencing a lot of great new releases for $10 a month, $15 a month, which is fantastic. We're not only seeing games as a service being released for traditional platforms like Xbox or PlayStation or other consoles. We're actually also seeing it in the mobile gaming market, where we're seeing Google Play Games or Apple Arcade. Very nominal fees per month, I think $5 to $10, but you get access to exclusive gaming content. You get ad-free experiences. You get extra in-game content, whether it's boosters or DLC. So we are seeing, I guess, those other monetization models from other medium carry over into the gaming world. Whether that's going to be the reality in 2, 3, 5 years' time, I'm not sure. I mean, I did not have high hopes for VR being a big thing 5 years ago, and we're still, I think, we haven't really cracked that nut. So it might be the same thing for games as a service. I definitely have more confidence in this monetization and this business strategy than I did VR. I mean, VR is going to be fantastic, but it's not going to really hit the mainstream until 5 to 10 years' time, I think. But it is a great time for consumers to be taking advantage of all of these great offers that these other companies are providing, trying to get that market share from the get-go so they can retain their consumers long term. And
you mentioned, there's two, as you mentioned, within the gaming community, there's two quite contentious issues here. So you do obviously understand the games industry as a business, but, especially in-game advertising and microtransactions have caused a lot of controversy, a lot of heated debate, shall we say, within the kind of games community. And what's your take on, if we take advertising, for example? I think, was it Burnout a few years ago that had the first example of real world advertisements in game? Are we going to see that proliferate more? Are we going to see more of that synergy, that kind of crossover between real life brands and these virtual worlds that game developers create?
Yeah, I mean, transactions are an interesting one. I mean, the choice always lies with the consumer, but there is a responsibility there to do it in the right way. I think keeping the consumer at the forefront and making sure that you respect them and their choices is absolutely paramount to any game development process. I think when you start introducing other options for the consumer, like watching advertising, whether it's a rewarded video model, whether it's a brand integration, or whether it's microtransactions, I think that goes a long way to respect the consumer in giving them the choice of how to consume this content. Yes, you can pay for this content, or you can give up your time to watch potentially a non-gaming endemic ad, but you will actually get something in return. But not forcing that on consumers, I think, is very important, making sure that they, at the end of the day, have a choice within what they consume and how they consume it.
Absolutely. I think that's one of, if anyone is interested, one of the recent controversies, I think it was NBA, the new NBA 2K game, which has unskippable advertisements in a full-priced console game, and the backlash to that has been sizable. And I think, but is that perhaps part of what we're seeing as the games industry matures and moves into this wider, more mainstream space? So with television, we expect to see advertisement. I mean, it's part and parcel of the experience. And is that going to happen? Are we going to see that more now as gaming also moves from being this previous sort of what was considered to be a niche hobbyist thing into a mass entertainment product that majority of the world does consume?
Yeah, I mean, advertising is a reality of most entertainment medium today, especially if there are free offerings, whether it's television, whether it's gaming, whether it's film, whatever else it might be. But there's the right way to do it. And there are some obvious ways where it's not the right way to do it. There are some instances like within a sporting franchise where it might make sense to have advertising integrated into the game. If you're within a football stadium, you're expecting to see brands going along the edge of the pitch in that kind of billboard signage. If you're watching Liverpool play within your game, you're expecting to see the same brands on the players' jerseys. That makes a lot of sense. It fits in with the natural experience. When it's something that's intrusive and stops the consumer from enjoying that content, no matter if it's gaming or any other medium, consumers are going to be very quick to backlash against that, as you can see. And I think that really, has implications for us as researchers, making sure that we're those advocates, we're those voices of the consumer within these organizations to stop these kind of these interactions from taking place, and making sure that the developers or producers of this kind of content are very much aware of how consumers will react to this kind of experience.
So you don't want that kind of 80s action movie moment where someone takes a sip from a can of drink and places the logo right in front of the camera. That's hopefully what we'll avoid, I think. I
hope we're a lot smarter than that today. Absolutely.
Well, and the interactivity, I guess, also, plays a big element in allowing for new methods of communicating with the potential consumers. I mean, if we're talking film and television, it's that passive experience, right? You're just sitting there, you're watching something. They might advertise to you, but that engagement isn't quite the same. How does that differ once again to games when you are the one in control? You are the one who's actively participating. Does that open up new methods, potential new tricks, or that we can use to market or to conduct research?
Yeah, gaming is very much more of a leaned-in experience. But even within gaming, much like the audiences are different, the leaned-in nature of the experience is different. Some are extremely attention-demanding, and if you are distracted for a microsecond, someone's going to turn around and take you out. But there are other experiences where it's a little bit more slowed down, and the pace is kind of done at your own time, whether it's a turn-based game or a puzzle game, for example. So I think when we think about advertising and introducing it within gaming experiences, we need to be mindful of the content that we're placing it in and the kind of consumption that's happening around that advertising. So we take Candy Crush as an example. I think in the early days, we actually started off with typical display and banner ads within the app. They are not a great ad format. Let's be clear. Like, the consumers reacted very quickly to that, and King rightfully pulled that experience out of the game. That's when they invested in Activision Blizzard Media, bringing in experts from the industry, doing a lot of consumer research, making sure that the users of this product are comfortable with what we're introducing. And what we did personally is we introduced an opt-in and rewarded ad model. So you need to choose to actually watch this ad. It's a video ad that plays before a round starts. And once you complete the 6, 10, 15, or 30-second video ad, you get something in return, whether it's a life or a booster or extended gameplay. There is that value exchange occurring, and it's very clear upfront what's expected of the consumer, and this experience isn't done in the middle of gameplay as you're making a decision breaking move or a round breaking move. It's not going to pop up right in front of your face. It's in between levels when you have a little bit time to think and relax and slow down. So again, one very niche example, but I think a lot of that ad's ethos can be applied to a lot of other experiences. So we avoid situations where we don't get burned and we don't annoy our consumers and with really bad experiences.
Yeah, I think we've probably both seen enough memes about, the mobile games that don't pay attention. You have the adverts with the extremely tiny cross in the corner where one takes you to download some bloatware app. I'm glad there's research being done to avoid that. And speaking of the research side of things, I'm curious about, your research, a lot of it goes into the kind of marketing side and how to kind of, relate to the community. How much of the same kind of research goes into the development of games? So let's say within Activision Blizzard, one of the things I came across recently, and I tried playing, but I'm not very good at FPSs. So Call of Duty Warzone, I gave it a go. I did not do well. But what is there research that goes into the development of these as well? You take a look at other kind of battle royales, other free-to-play shooters, and do you research the best elements or what players react best to?
Yeah, I mean, I can't speak with too much expertise here because we are working specifically within the ads and sponsorship side of the business, and there are other research teams that really speak to the games development process. But yeah, absolutely, there are a lot of competitive analysts that look to see what the rest of the industry is doing, what is working, and taking the best experiences out of that content and integrating it in a natural way into our own experiences for sure. But what's really important is that you continually test those ideas. You can't just copy and paste a functionality from one experience and bring it into another. The same way that you can't just take the Call of Duty experience with first-person shooter, very quick actions and precise movements. You can't just copy paste that experience to a mobile environment. You need to think about how the user is going to be engaging with this and make those tweaks accordingly. So that research happens all the time, whether that's third-party desk research looking at what others have done, or whether that's taking the developments you've done in-house to iterate on that product design process. Yeah, absolutely. Every single game development does that, and research and that voice of the consumer is really key to that, particularly for beloved franchises. I mean, you referenced Call of Duty, that's been around for decades. Yeah. It's one of the highest selling video games of all time. You can't play around with a brand like that. You need to make sure that you're looking after your audiences at every step of the process and every single touch point.
Absolutely. And I think, we won't name too many names because you don't know who's listening, but there have been some franchises, some games in recent years who have made those missteps. They have, either underestimated their audience or tried to perhaps mislead an audience. And do you think some of that also stems from, is that purely coming from a business sort of development perspective where you see things like loot boxes being introduced in certain franchises? Or is there research that might suggest, developers to take that approach? And which one of the things I've always, wondered about when it comes to the games industry is how much is, who has their hands on the wheel, really? Is it more the kind of development and the creativity, or is it more in this age of huge studios, such as Activision Blizzard and others around the world? Is it that business development side? Is it the kind of profit-driven, shareholder maximization side? What are your views on, how do you see that panning out as we go forwards and as games get bigger and bigger in budget and in scope?
Yeah, if I wasn't an expert in the previous question, I'm even less well positioned to be answering this one.
More of an insider than I am, so it's definitely...
I mean, that is just it's another example where it doesn't benefit all the parties involved, and we really need to make sure that all stakeholders are looked after here. Whether it's the developers, whether it's shareholders, whether it's the audiences and consumers that are actually engaging with this content. So, if we have something that does not work for one of those parties, it shouldn't be there. There are plenty of other options that we can be using to engage and create these great experiences. It's definitely something that is a miss because we're not listening to consumers and we're not tapping into the actual end users of our product.
And I guess to circle back to the end users and to where this conversation started with the gamer mum audience, how do you see the game audience growing? So I think it's safe to expect that it will grow as you move forwards from now. Are there any particular kind of audience sectors or new sectors of potential gaming audience that you see growing, or that you'd like to research perhaps as well, that you'd like to take a closer look into as part of Activision Blizzard Media? Is it any particular demographic that you have your eye on? Yeah,
there's definitely a lot of education to do on how things currently stand. We're still sitting in the world where people have this idea of a gamer in the 90s, where we need to bring them up to 2020 and really describe who gamers are today. We've just actually released a latest round of research that was piggybacking off the Gamer Mums research. If your listeners go to galleryofthegamer.com or go to activisionblizzardmedia.com and follow the links, we've actually expanded our research program to look at all gamer audiences. We're really inclusive in this kind of research, in that we would qualify a respondent if they played, watched, or just engaged generally with video games. You don't necessarily need to be sitting in front of a TV or a console to play games. You can be watching others' games. You can be following esports leagues. You could be listening to gaming podcasts or reading about gaming news. That qualifies you as someone who consumes gaming content. So there's a lot of work in highlighting these new audiences that have been consuming gaming, but perhaps, in their own homes or behind the screen where they're not at the forefront. Whereas, the rest of the industry is focusing on, the latest esport leagues and big tournaments and the like. So there's a lot of work to do there before we focus on, the growth of the industry. That said, once you're reaching 1 in 2 Brits or Americans or 1 in 3 people across the globe, there is still growth forecast, but it's going to slow down eventually because you're starting to reach every single kind of consumer. So I think where the real development is going to be is the deepening of engagement. We're finding, particularly with our gamer mums research, that I think it was 54% of them started playing video games in the last 10 years. So the majority of them are relatively new to gaming. That coincides with the launch of or the launch of the iPhone or Android devices as well. So once we get them into gaming, now they can see the value it has to offer. Like the mother of 2 from Florida that I mentioned, she can see all the different kind of benefits and the different kind of need states that gaming can fulfill. It's about introducing these audiences that are new to gaming to all of what gaming has to offer. And by the time that happens, there's the hope that people, our colleagues that grew up with ourselves in the 80s and 90s that are creating these new gaming experiences, are more inclusive in their development process. They're thinking about the new audiences that are consuming gaming content, and that will be reflected in the characters that are going to be able to be played within the game, the kind of locations and settings that games narratives are placed, and the kind of marketing that goes out as well. We're not just marketing to teenage boys anymore. There's a big market opportunity here, and making sure that all consumers are aware of this really great content that is akin to like watching a film or reading a book. It's a great entertainment experience, just done in a different medium.
That's really interesting, the way you describe it in terms of deepening then, because I guess my perception coming into this was that, as with some other industries, what you might be aiming for as a games developer or as a publisher is that sort of chain of involvement. So someone starts from a mobile game and then they move on to a console game and then they move on to another kind of console game, and then maybe eventually somewhere down the line they have a custom built gaming PC sitting on their desk at home. But it's not quite that, right? It's more the sense of whatever platform it is that you are engaging with, it's strengthening the experience that you get from that particular platform without forcing you to move to another one.
Yeah, it could be you as a parent seeing that your child is going to watch the Overwatch League or the Call of Duty League, and you're like, someone's watching someone else play video games on the main stage in a stadium. What I don't understand that. Let me try to understand why my loved one is consuming this content, and that starts that exploration and that journey. It could come from there. It could come from someone downloading a free game, or someone gets invited, by their friends to try out a game. It could be, a couch co-op that someone plays at a dinner party or whatever. There are a dozen different ways that you can enter this medium. And then from there, that's only scratching the surface. There's so much depth here and so much that you can explore. There are games that were released 20, 30 years ago that I haven't played yet.
Yeah.
I have an extensive back catalog that keeps growing and growing. And then even me, who I would describe myself as a seasoned gamer, I haven't experienced, more than half of what the gaming industry has to offer. So imagine someone entering the space for the very first time, all the great things that are ahead of them, if only they would know about them, and if only there would be that stigma removed from actually consuming this content.
So we've spoken a few times, I guess, throughout this conversation about both of our experiences growing up, playing games and looking at this industry now. And for you working within the industry as well, what are, it's a purely personal question, what are some of your favorite games from over the years, and how have you seen the kind of gaming landscape evolve and change over your time playing?
I mean, how long do you have? This is
as long as you need, as long as you want it.
Well, back in 1990, I mean, my first video game console was a Super Nintendo Entertainment System, and that came prepackaged Mario All-Stars, which was amazing. Super Mario Brothers 3 remains my number one favorite game of all time, but that console was incredible. I managed to pick up Super Metroid and Street Fighter 2 from a cash converters, like a trade-in exchange kind of business, just based on the box art alone. I picked those games up for like $5, which is incredible. So that's where my love for gaming started. And I'm a Nintendo fanboy ever since. But I'm a huge fantasy and sci-fi nerd. So I'm a dungeon master in a D&D campaign or a couple of D&D campaigns. Yeah. So I have a natural affinity for RPGs like The Witcher and Diablo, we've already mentioned in this podcast earlier. But those kind of experiences where you can immerse yourself and be very creative and enter new worlds, I think is really appealing. It allows you a chance to escape and really unwind and really experience something that you couldn't anywhere else. It's something that you can have control over, which is really exciting, as opposed to passively consuming the content. You actually can influence the worlds and influence your own experiences as a result. I really appreciate that within video games. So that's like historically, some of the tenets of my gaming background. But today, like I mentioned before, Hearthstone is really, I think, a really great way to reimagine what gaming experiences are like, being able to get that snackable experience when you have the time for not a big marathon session. I think that's really cool. And we mentioned a couple of these games earlier today, but seeing the gaming industry turn into this shared experience, games like Journey, games that you play on couch co-op like Overcooked or Jackbox, or digitally shared game experiences like Fall Guys and Among Us, where you literally have like a member of the US Senate being able to play on Twitch with anyone. Like that is just, this is such an exciting medium, and so many new characters are tapping into it that we'd never think of before. They're being used as political platforms. We're seeing Joe Biden create his own island in Animal Crossing and using that for publicity. I think that's amazing. So starting to experiment with that is really cool. And I love the kind of open world sandbox that is video games, with all these cool experiences that it has to offer. And I guess what I'm playing right now, I mentioned before, Hades. It is my cup of tea. It is like the perfect mix of roguelike and Diablo and this fast pace, excellent ancient Greek mythology storyline that I really love. So I'm really enjoying getting into that. I'm still making my way through Mario 3D All-Stars. Super Mario Sunshine is one of my favorite Mario games. And then once my TV gets finally delivered, I've just moved recently and TV's been on back order, but I'm excited to get back into Ghost of Tsushima. I think that's a really cool PlayStation title that's really showing the what's new about this industry and the kind of what we're looking to as to what's next in terms of graphical fidelity, in terms of mechanics and storyline and all that good stuff.
It's interesting you mentioned that, just because I was thinking, one of the things that people often talk about, the kind of metric that you use to gauge how games have evolved, is it tends to be graphics, right? It tends to be, Doom back in the late 90s was this kind of voxel art, just, sprites moving around. And then you look at the new Dooms that's out today, and it's this 60 frames per second, colorful, frenetic thing. So you use graphics as a benchmark, but, I'm also currently through another playthrough of The Witcher 3, and writing, really stands out to me as something that's evolved a lot, over the. And we're not talking kind of, Oregon Trail type, you died of dysentery sort of writing, but I mean these storylines and these kind of interactive quests and dialogue choices and things that have really become an art form, into and of themselves. And where do you land on the? I know this is a kind of age-old discussion, but the games as art, debate. I mean, when it comes to not just the visual side, but also the emotional side, the storytelling side as well.
I mean, that's the kind of analogy we've been making with this gallery of the gamer.com activation that we've been doing. We see video games as art, and we also see the gamers that play games as art. They are so intricate and diverse and exciting and interesting to look at and observe that. Absolutely. I agree with that statement. I mean, you don't have to have the highest graphical fidelity in a game. A game I've spent 1,000 hours in is called Ancient Domains of Mystery. It's a ASCII-based text game where you're literally an @ symbol on the screen and you're moving around in diagonal movements and using a lot of text and your imagination to really fill in the gaps and tell that story within the world. As we saw with our own research, there are dozens of different motivations for tapping into gaming. Story is absolutely one of them. Having immersive content, seeing yourself represented or being able to play out your own experiences in a game like Overwatch, for example, is really key to a lot of gamers. And I'm really excited that today we're actually able to experience or fulfill all of these motivations from this medium that once thought to be only fulfilling one kind of thing, and that's like
Mhm.
violence and action. But that is like
Yeah.
such a tiny fraction of what this industry has to offer.
And you mentioned, before, and I do apologize in public knowledge, but your wife and yourself are expecting your first child. I mean, what's going to be the first game you introduce them to as a as a gamer? What's going to be their portal into this world?
I don't know if I have I have more internal battles with this question versus how I'm going to introduce my child into Star Wars or other great, fantasy or sci-fi content. It's like, do you expose them to what's new and the most exciting experiences, or do you expose them chronologically? What I played in the 90s. I mean, I still have my consoles behind me that will be up and hooked up once the TV finally arrives, that are going to be accessible at any point. I mean, imagine a lot of the first experiences are going to be watching me play games or watching someone else in the household play games, and there will be a natural curiosity as part of that. I have a lot of colleagues that have young children, and that's how they start. They actually just walk or crawl up and pick up a controller and start pushing buttons, or start asking, their dad or their mom to be like, hey, what is this character doing? Go and talk to them, or go and do this. And that is just an equally valid way to play video games or engage with video gaming content. So you know what? At the end of the day, I'm not sure it matters exactly in what order I introduce my child to video games, as long as it's there and as long as it's an experience that they want to have, and then they can make their own. I think that's all we can ask for.
Yeah, I think you can't do the old days of having the disconnected second controller that you give to your friend's little brother who's being.
I've used that way too much. That's a tired tactic, unfortunately.
They're wise. I guess it's sort of like an and finally question. This was when I knew this recording was coming up, I put it to the Esomar team. If there's gamers among them, to say what would you want to ask? Of someone who works in the research sector, but is also, within the games industry. We had an interesting question come back from one of the members of the team who asked, we see games about, farm simulators, and you have like roller coaster tycoons, and you have, truck driving simulators. As a researcher, what are your thoughts on a market research simulator? And would it be a way to get people interested or engaged in the work that you do and in the work that, Esomar members do?
I mean, there are a lot of resource management and simulators that have covered pretty dry topics, and research is typically thought of as a pretty dry industry. But you know what? Managing a qualitative fieldwork facility is pretty freaking stressful and daunting, but it can be very rewarding. So simulating that kind of experience, making sure that you're backing up respondents that they're going to pull out at any given moment, or making sure that you don't have anyone derailing the conversation within a qualitative group. Absolutely. I think that would be a great way to train junior researchers before they're actually thrown into the deep end and have to experience that. I mean, the research industry can be really innovative and really groundbreaking, but it can also be really stale and really obsolete at times. I mean, I was speaking to a vendor the other day who was still including the option of a consumer selecting that they rent video games from the likes of a blockbuster or
it's those days,
it's just, you have instances of that, but then you have some really great experiences where you can take a grocery shopping experience into the home with a VR headset and mock up a shelf or a storefront and gauge consumers' reactions to different kind of products and placements. So in a way, the research industry has been tapping into these kind of gaming elements that really engage consumers and really give us a lot of rich insight into how consumers engage. So sorry to turn this into a boring answer. I'm sure we'll look to turn this into something a bit more hypothetical and greenfield, but I think we as researchers really need to be tapping into all the technology we have available to us, whether it's an in-game world like World of Warcraft. Imagine hosting a research conference within the Shadowlands or wherever else. That would be really cool to do. I think we should start thinking about how consumers are interacting with this tech and apply it to the work that we do, particularly at this time when we can't do a lot of work in person and have to take it into people's homes potentially.
So we have the gamification of research on the one hand, and we have turning research into a game on the other, which, let's see, maybe there's an Esomar Activision collaboration in the works. Well, and a big thank you for taking the time to join us and sharing your kind of insider knowledge on the sector. It's been an absolute pleasure having this chat, from gamer to gamer, I think. And Yeah, no, thanks a lot for taking the time to join us.
Yeah, absolute pleasure anytime. I mean, always down to talk about video games, and if I can tie it into my industry and my discipline, all the better.
Fantastic. Well, we have to have you back again sometime soon as we see some of the things we discuss, these new consoles and the kind of developments coming out. Maybe down the line we have a catch up to see how things have evolved over the next few months.
Yeah, no shortage of things to talk about. Anytime.
And thank you as always to you, our listeners, for joining us for this discussion on a sector that is very dear to my heart and to millions of other people across the globe. And you can find the link to the Gamer Mums research in this week's episode description, as well as on Research World. I do hope you've enjoyed the conversation this week. I hope you've learned something new, and I hope we've left you with some food for thought, and hopefully the urge to pick up a controller or your phone and do some gaming yourself. Don't forget, you can always email your feedback and ideas to podcast@esomar.org, and make sure to follow us on your podcast platform of choice. In the meantime, please do stay safe, stay healthy, stay curious, and I hope you'll join us again next time.